Hare Krishna. It's been a long time since I've talked about these 50 years in ISKCON. Let me first offer my obeisances to all you devotees who are interested to hear these things. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhuvevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. I have to put my mind back into what we were doing before. We had 20 talks taking us from 1970. Well, actually, I initially spoke about how I came to Krishna consciousness. And then from that time onwards, and the last episode, I believe we were up to 1995, when we were living in Alachua and we decided to take the move to Mayapur. So we'll start from there. And I want to mention something that happened before we left America. It was just a few months before we left. My father suddenly passed away. He had not been sick. He just had a sudden, massive heart attack. And so I went to the funeral in Cadillac, Michigan, Upper Michigan. And when I arrived, I was very surprised to find that he had been cremated, because our family just doesn't do that. And I was like, Mom, why did you do that? And she explained that although he wasn't sick and he wasn't, thinking of departing the world soon, it was just, I think she said a couple of weeks before he died, that he just spontaneously said, when I die, just bury the damn thing. That's my dad speak. And my mom was so surprised, but John, why? And he said, no, that's what I want, just bury the damn thing. And he was very insistent. So my mom, she felt obliged, here it was, just a couple weeks later, he died. And so she did as he said, as he wanted. Although, in our family already there were plots there for each of our graves so that, the whole family would lay in the ground together forever. So it was kind of a radical move from my mom. And so I asked her, well, what are you going to do with those ashes? And she said, I have no idea. And I said, well, I know what to do. I know we have all this process. We take them to the sacred rivers and we do a worship for the benefit of the soul and everything. So my mom, she seemed very happy and she said, oh, would you do that, honey? And I was, yeah, sure. So, I was just happy. I thought, well, that's cool. And there was no further discussion about it with any other family members. I attended the funeral and I left with the ashes. I didn't know that a lot of things happened after I left. I would find that out many years later. But anyway, I'll talk about that when we come to it. So on the way, when we left America, on the way to Mayapur, we stopped in Vrindavan. So I could take care of my DD outfit schedule. And during that time, we took my dad's ashes to the Jamuna. So Harisari set up a little, like a little yagya on the bank of the Jamuna. I'd never done this before, so he was just kind of leading the way. And also up to this point, I didn't have much realization about why we place ashes into the Jamuna. I mean, I knew it was beneficial somehow, but I thought it was really just a practical way to show the living, where it all ends. you know. But, you know, I felt good that I was doing something that was probably good for my dad. And although I was not very close to him, I didn't have a problem with him either. It just, you know, he just is a not very emotionally connecting kind of person. And so it wasn't really an emotional experience for me to do this. I wasn't like anticipating, oh, you know, it was, you know, just kind of doing my duty. And so it was very surprising what happened to me. When my husband entered the water and he placed the ashes in the water, I suddenly felt electrified, like a punch in the heart. And I was suddenly just overwhelmed with emotions, and tears just came into my eyes. All this, you know, just spontaneously. And it was a very powerful and very unexpected experience. I didn't feel that it was due to familial attachment, but rather it felt that something very significant had actually happened right then. And I just didn't understand what it was, what really happened. I mean, you know, he died some months before, and wherever he was going, he was already there. So it was puzzling to me. And my husband also, he was feeling, wow, that was kind of amazing. So we went back to our place and we started to search through to find, you know, some quotes like, what does this do? You know, what actually happened, and try to understand it. So we went through Shastra and we found a couple of, you know, interesting explanations. One was from the story when King Bhagirath brought the Ganges down to the place where the bodies of his forefathers lay there, burnt ashes. And so there, I think in a purport, it was explained that simply by being sprinkled with Ganges water, all those souls became eligible to go to the heavenly planets. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then in another place, we saw an explanation that said, wherever that departed soul now resides, he will become free from all past sinful activities, sinful reactions. So that was just amazing to me, that what better thing could you do for another living entity? And I felt so happy. And I also felt myself very purified from doing it. You know how when you maybe you go on Sankirtan for the whole day, and you know, you come home and you can just see it in your face that there's some cleansing, you know, that you become purified. You can feel it. And so I felt, you know, I could see that. I could see that I became purified by doing it. So I had now a much better, you know, practical realization of, you know, how and why, you know, in the Vedic tradition, it's very important that you have duties to the forefathers. You know, I mean, of course, as devotees, we don't emphasize this aspect of the Vedas so much, as Prabhupada explained, that simply by engaging in devotional service, even neophytes, our ancestors will be benefited, will be liberated. What that liberation is and how and when it happens, I don't know. I'm sure it differs. But that is there. That has been said, you know. So now I had this practical realization of the power of what we can do for our family. And I was just drenched with a feeling of happiness and purification. It was very, very unexpected. And I was happy that finally I could do something for my father. And now, being a parent now, I now recognized and appreciated much more what it means to be a parent. And even though we were not super close, but he took care of us. He worked hard at a not very pleasant job to provide everything that we had without complaint or expectations, and that should be respected and honored. So although I hadn't done that very much during his life, I now felt satisfied that I could do this. I could do something very big, the biggest thing, really, at this, after his departure. And so I felt I had paid my dues. That it's something that we don't necessarily think about, what we owe. What we owe to everyone from the time of birth. Anyway, I wanted to bring this up because it was a practical realization. It's something that really hit me in the heart, that I realized how powerful is this process, that I just could see as I watched those ashes floating down the Jamuna. I could just marvel. My dad, John Cromie, the beer-drinking factory worker who was not particularly interested, not a religious man, here he is, has somehow he made it to Vrindavan, this amazing mercy. And it just really helped me to comprehend how miraculous this process of Krishna consciousness is. And, I'm talking about it a lot just because I think it's just very good to cultivate this understanding, the amazing power of what we've been given, And since then, I have heard so many remarkable stories of the liberation of devotee parents. Really remarkable. Somebody should write a book. And I also feel that I've become personally more aware of just how we are in debt right from birth. I realized that I had not understood that I had a debt to my parents. Kids, no matter how old you get, often just don't think about what we are given. We just expect it, like we have some sense of entitlement. My parents are just supposed to feed me. They're supposed to give me money. They're supposed to, So I do get it now. I do understand why the Vedic system places a lot of importance on training the young to respect elders, and that there are many rituals and practices that are recommended to foster that understanding, that my life is not just about my sense gratification, but to know that we have duties, responsibilities to others. And that's human life. This, attitude of gratitude and appreciation, this sense of gratitude and appreciation for all that we've been given, that is a natural attitude of a Vaishnava. It's part of a culture of respect, and even just a culture just of being a decent human being. And because, some people, they complain or see that devotees, we sometimes appear to be neglectful of our parents, our family, that we're also busy in devotional service. And of course, we have been, in the earlier days, but and we shouldn't be neglectful. But more important is to know that if we're taking up devotional service seriously, even if we're not extremely advanced, it's said that 21 generations of our ancestors receive benefit from whatever transcendental activities we perform. So that's really significant. So I just wanted to talk about that because it was something that really impacted on me. So anyway, we continued on from Vrindavan to Mayapur, and we arrived there to set up household there. And it was new to me because previously I had only come to Mayapur for festivals. And I was spent so much time in Vrindavan. So I wasn't really, I didn't know what it would be like to live there long term. And it wasn't without challenges, which over the years I've seen. I've seen that it's rather common when devotees come with the intentions to reside in the Dham. It's not always easy, and some challenges are often there, perhaps to test one's faith and determination, because it is really no small blessing at all to live in the Dham. In fact, it is one of the greatest. Rather, it is practically impossible to calculate the benefit of living in any Dham. And although we may think that we have, decided to live in Mayapur, the permission for that residence, it must be given by the Lord. It's not our decision. We may express that we would like that, but we are permitted by the mercy of the Lord. So it really is something to always remember and never to take for granted that even the demigods desire residence in Navadvip Dham. At that time, when we moved to Mayapur, I was regularly reading the Navadvip Dham Mahatmya of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which is a most amazing book, most amazing, that all devotees should be familiar with, because it's describing Lord Nityananda taking Jiva Goswami on parikrama. And it's just mind-blowing. And I'm just going to read a few points from just the few pages of that book, just to give a sense of what is this place where we are. I'm going to read that. Let me find it here. Okay. This is from Navadvip Dham Mahatmya. The whole of Mandala is Chintamani, yielding all desires. That sentence again. The whole of Mandala is Chintamani, yielding all desires. The Dham is full of knowledge and bliss and is completely spiritual. The water, the land, the trees, everything in the Dham is spiritual, unlike the dull matter of this material world. Navadvip Dham is the topmost tirtha, the crest jewel of all holy places. Taking shelter of it, the living entities can cross over Kali Yuga. He who lives in Navadvip Dham is very fortunate, for he achieves attraction to Krishna. He who happens to go there becomes freed from all offenses. What one attains by traveling to all the holy places is attained just by remembering Navadvip Dham. I mean, this is Lord Nityananda explaining these things. So it's not hype or exaggeration. This is the reality. And those who always reside in Navadvip Dham are the most fortunate in the world. So it is, impossible, those are some quotes, impossible to understand the mercy and the greatness and the rarity and the boundless blessing available here in Navadvip Dham. But, we can't understand it. You're just like a little, atom or a little bug trying to understand the universe. It's incomprehensible, but, we just have to keep trying. And eventually, realization will follow by the mercy of the Lord, who sees our effort and our desire. So having spent a good amount of time in Vrindavan, I did have some awareness of the importance of not becoming too familiar. When you spend a long time in the Dham, it's very different than when you just come for a few days or you just come for parikrama, because you're very focused and you're, there to drink up the mercy. But when you're living there, year after year, it can be a challenge to remember, where we are, just where we are and what it is. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he warns that one who sees only the activities of material nature in the Dham is a conditioned soul under the influence of ignorance and illusion. Yeah. Anyway, we keep trying. And Srila Prabhupada also, he was very, he warned us very much about living in the Dham. He said that, this was in regards talking about Vrindavan, he said, it's possible to make very fast progress, but it's also possible to become a Ravana. Meaning, be very careful, be very careful. Remember where you are, what you're dealing with. It's not so easy. It's not so easy. So on the practical side, we were trying to make our home in Mayapur, and finding a suitable place to stay was not easy, because there weren't so many apartments at that time that were available to rent. All of them were owned by someone, and that someone would undoubtedly want to come and stay in their own place at some point. So when that happened, then a renter would have to move out. So thus we were forced to move from place to place fairly frequently, which was really not very ideal for a young family. And I could see in Mayapur, the same kind of thing, the stage of growth was happening as we described in Alachua, that householders were migrating to various places looking for stability and just a suitable place to live and practice, and especially where there would be schools. And so there was a growing need for facilities for families, and seeing that, management was putting up many apartment buildings. They were being banged up pretty quickly to create those accommodations. But apart from providing living facilities, it was clear to me that there was no real plan in place for the development of a healthy, burgeoning community. You know, no plan for the economic structure or governance or guidelines or physical and emotional support or, you know, spiritual guidance and training. It was just happening spontaneously as more devotees from around the world migrated there. And so it was this new aspect of ISKCON. You know, we had outgrown the ashram structure, but we didn't really have anything else fully in place to replace it. So at that time there was a master plan team headed by Abhiram Prabhu, and Harikesh Prabhu at that time was much involved in the development of Mayapur also. And that team was working on, of course, the design for the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, but they were also designing, it wasn't just about a temple, it was about the township. So they were designing that as part of their master plan. That was going on. But when that plan would start to come to the ground reality, nobody could really say. And but it was apparent that there was much work was required, would be required to design and develop a devotee community. And eventually I became somewhat involved in that after some time. But for these first few years, it was personally just more of an internal focus on family. And, you know, this was new to me. After many years of single life, it was a big shift. As with any service, it takes time to learn how to do it, figure out what you're doing, and I think it's important point to mention that entering into married life for a devotee is best seen as taking on a new service. It isn't like, you know, because sometimes I've seen this concept that here's my service and my spiritual life is over here, and then over here is my private life. And I don't think that's the best way for a devotee. All devotees' activities, all their activities are meant to be done in a spirit of service. And in this way, you know, everything can propel us forward spiritually. Everything. It's just on the consciousness, what we're doing, how we're doing it. It's about the consciousness, you know. So there is an interesting and a rather radical quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur regarding Vaishnava marriages. And I'm going to read it because it's quite far out. And anyway, I'll just read it. So here it is. The cardinal principle of Grihastha Ashram is that no one may be the owner of any property or service of the other. Everyone is only a servant whose activities are ever in the service of the Lord. Similarly, the sole object of everyone's service as the only master, the sole object of everyone's service as the only master, only friend, only son, and only consort is Krishna. Marrying and giving in marriage do not give rise to any rights of a master, either to the husband or to the wife. Men and women are joined in wedlock for the purpose of serving each other in the performance of the joint service of Krishna. The wife is not an object of enjoyment of the husband, nor vice versa. They do not marry for gratifying their sexual appetites. They marry for pleasing the Lord, not for pleasing themselves. They choose for their partners only such persons who serve God better than themselves. They offer themselves to be accepted by their partners for the favor of being allowed to share in their superior service of Hari. Neither the husband nor the wife should claim the services of his or her partner on their own account. Both of them are only to offer their services if and when their partner is pleased to permit them to share their service of Hari. None of them can force their partners to serve them. This system of household discipline has its roots in the joint worship of the household deity by all members of the household. There's a pretty high aspirations here, and even Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says, admits that there are very few who can live up to this mentality, but it's certainly something helpful to meditate on, to at least curb our controlling and enjoying tendencies. And I appreciated this point that he made about the joint worship of the household deity. It's something I forgot to mention when we got married. Right after we got married, we went to Vrindavan, and Harisori wanted to start the worship of a small Srila Prabhupada deity to consciously, make him the central focus of our marriage. And so he was looking for a deity, and one day he ran into Ayendra outside of his room, or just at the doorway of his room, and he mentioned that he was looking for a deity of Prabhupada. And so Ayendra, he just reached behind a curtain and pulled out this little deity of Prabhupada. He said, "Here you go." So Harisori was really happy, and he saw this is the perfect arrangement of Krishna. And personally, I was a little reluctant, as I didn't think it was the best likeness of Srila Prabhupada, my mundane way of seeing. But my husband was very satisfied, and it was going to be his Ishtadev. He was going to worship him daily. So we, happily started that worship every day, and Harisori served the deity in the same way that he had served Srila Prabhupada as his servant. He would offer the massage in the same way. He put sandalwood on his head and mustard oil on his body and go around his body in the same specific order that he'd done it for Srila Prabhupada. So it was very nice for him, to just keep on being the servant of Srila Prabhupada. And then, he'd offer arti and we'd make a large fruit offering. So, I just mentioned that, because, of course, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta brought up this point, and I think it's just a very positive element in a Vaishnava marriage, creating the center, serving the deity and the spiritual master together. It creates a focus, and it can be the glue that keeps a couple together over long periods of time. And so back to our situation in Mayapur. After we were forced to move in and out of a number of apartments, I started to feel a little discouraged. And so one day I mentioned to a friend that I was beginning to think that, maybe we're not meant to live in Mayapur. Maybe this is not our place. And when I said this, my friend's husband, he had overheard me. And so he came into the room and he was kind of excited, and he said, this must be Krishna's arrangement. He said, I was just thinking this morning that I should buy one of the apartments in the new building that they were constructing, and just as an investment. So if you want to sign a long-term lease, 5 years you can start with, I'll go ahead and buy the place. So that was a wonderful blessing for us. A solid situation in the Dham, a home in the Dham with a very reasonable rent, and a situation that continued by the mercy of this devotee, Param, for 28 years now or so. So that was a real blessing. So another problem that we faced in those early years was the continued health issues of our daughter, Rasarani. I spoke about how she had been hospitalized in Florida before we came to India, and an astrologer had warned us that she was likely to have more difficulty and more of this. So soon after we arrived in Mayapur, she had another episode with lung issues. Now, during those days, there was absolutely no facility nearby. So you can imagine how scary it is, when your kid needs to be in a hospital immediately and there's nowhere to go. You have to go to Calcutta, a long drive, and it was even difficult to get a taxi in those days, So we had these emergency situations a few times, and each hospital experience was absolutely a nightmare. I mean, there's no need to explain these things, but suffice to say these were, challenges that we faced. Actually, the second crisis situation where we really needed urgently to get Rasarani to the hospital as quick as possible, we could only get an open-sided Jeep. And the driver, I will say, was an idiot. He was, before we even reached Krishnanagar, he was swerving wildly around potholes in the road, and he lost control completely of the vehicle. And the car lurched sideways and off the road and down a steep embankment. And Rasarani, who was bundled up and lying on my lap, was hurled out of my arms, out the open-sided door, and disappeared like a piece of cotton in the wind. And the Jeep just kept bouncing down the steep gully until it came to a halt. It was horrifying. And I was just screaming, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And I thought, surely she's dead. And we jumped out of the taxi and we scrambled desperately up this incline. And then I suddenly, I saw her lying in the middle of the road, and I heard her, Mommy. And, miraculously, she seemed to be okay. And at that point, when my husband saw she was okay, he looked like he was about to pound on the driver. And I said, no, wait. We've got to get her to the hospital. Let's keep focused here. And miraculously, as we were helplessly standing on the road holding Rasarani, an ISKCON truck pulled up and helped us to get another car to get into Calcutta. Anyway, and then all of that was also more nightmares. And I just mention these things, as, just to give a sense, that living in the Dham, especially in those earlier days, it could often be very challenging. And, there's just so much that we have to go through in our practical life living situations. These are things, you don't read them in Lilamrita or something, but, so many devotees we have to go through just, life experiences that are very challenging. And anyway, while we were being in Mayapur, Harsori was focusing on trying to write the next volumes of his Transcendental Diaries, and also on the sales of his first volume. And I continued to regularly go to Vrindavan for churning out the deity outfits for various temples, and also going to Jaipur to get deities made. I think around this time I was having Radhe Shyam for Alachua made around this year, and others. But while we were sort of immersed in just setting up household life in Mayapur, there were some important events in 95, 96. I don't, this is not a necessarily super accurate historical accounts, I'm just generalizing around this time, 95, 96, which there were some significant changes that impacted on ISKCON around the world. And I just want to mention some of those things, because part of the purpose of these talks is to give a sense of how ISKCON was developing and changing through the years. How did it change? Why did it change? And so one of these things was the success of what was called the Manor Campaign. Now, outside of India, Bhaktivedanta Manor was, I think, the largest temple and one of the most important projects in ISKCON. But from the mid-1980s, there had been an attempt to shut down the temple worship to the public. And so there was a 10-year battle that went on. I feel like the younger generations, future generations, they need to know about so many battles were fought throughout the years. And there will be battles in the future that, so it's just giving some, those challenges that we'll have to go into the future, some ideas of how to go through these changes. And yes, that there's always going to be challenges, so this started because a few of the Lechmore Heath homeowners, they freaked out when devotees started to buy properties in their quaint and very expensive, idyllic little village. Even a devotee bought the village shop and named it, big letters, Krishna, the Krishna shop, right in the middle of the village, So there was a big fear that property prices would plummet, which scared the daylights out of, many of the residents. And the temple president at the time said, you might as well have said that Satan is in there eating up their little children, because there's just no bigger issue than property prices to the British, especially in a small and affluent village of about 100 homes that's right next to London, So this was a battle. And what happened is that the Indian community rallied in a way that was almost astonishing. I think there was up to 40,000 people that participated in helping, and many, many young people. I think this was the beginning of the Pandava Sane that was developed to fight the battle. The Pandavas, they're going to fight the battle, because they saw, they had come to feel that ISKCON, this is our temple. And that was very significant, because it was the first very large Indian congregation that was fully supporting us, which means that we were gradually moving from being seen as a small band of radical young people to a respectable spiritual community, of serious practitioners. So the Indian community worked very hard to help, And I think I can safely say that we could not have won without them. So this solidified their relationship and their commitment to us. So this is the beginning of another very significant change in ISKCON focus and mood, preaching, and demographics. You know, the expansion and development of the congregation and the involvement and membership of huge amounts of Indian people, you know, the Indian influence. And that would change, you know, the ISKCON culture, especially immediately at the manor, and was a trend that would be followed in many places. You know, more and more programs to cater to Indians. So, you know, there are some that would say this is the time of the Hinduization of ISKCON, as there was a fear that to depend on the Indians financially may result in us watering things down in order to cater to them. And there would likely be less attention then given to local preaching and devotee care. Now, others see it very differently. And of course, over time will tell us more about this, how these things unfold. But in any case, at that time, it is important to understand that ISKCON had been through some pretty rough times. And there had been a loss of devotees, and Sankirtan and book distribution had decreased in many places, and there were financial difficulties. And in some places, it was a challenge to keep things afloat. And we needed help, and help came from the Indian community. And of course, we did become more and more dependent on them. In India also, we started to get big congregations and more Indian people joining ISKCON, which was new. This was new. We, you know, up until a certain point, we had very few Indian devotees, very few. So now it was a significant demographic change of who was now coming into the movement and why. You know, in the early days, devotees joined from somewhat similar backgrounds and culture, and when they joined, it meant that they would give up everything, materially speaking, to join the Sankirtan mission full time. So now all different sorts were coming for different reasons, of different ages and different cultures and varying degrees of commitment and practice. And even some would start to come to improve their material condition, especially in India. And that was a new phenomena that some were coming to take, not necessarily to give, but, you know, Krishna says all kinds of people come to me. The point is to come to him and to become purified. So there's much that could be said about these changes, but, you know, not here. These are ongoing issues. And but one thing I do think that we should recognize, that without the help of the Indian community, it was really unlikely that we could have, you know, won that battle and even survived. At least I perceive it that way. And there were other new events, issues, problems surfacing that had to be dealt with. Of course, you know, the guru situation, this is ongoing. Adjustments had been made to manage how gurus function within the society in a more balanced way. You know, for some time now, there had, you know, the simultaneous guru pujas were stopped, and public worship and chanting of the mantras of new gurus was stopped, and now, you know, gurus were free to preach in any zone, and there were now many more new gurus. So, you know, that brought change to society. I mean, just see how different it was. You know, like for us, there was one guru, there was Prabhupada, and now we find disciples, you're in the temple room of many gurus and different moods and sometimes competitiveness. My guru is better than your guru or whatever. And, but we're just trying to do the best we could. And the GBC was trying to do some restructuring, adding new ministries. I think around that time they started Grihastha ministry, and they were being forced to write a number of papers to try to clarify issues. But a lot of damage had been done, and it was not easy to undo. And although many gurus seem to be doing well, there seem to be many satisfied and happy disciples. But still, of course, there are groups of devotees who just were against, all gurus, no matter how it was being done. And some felt, even till today, that Srila Prabhupada's movement had been, hijacked by ambitious and avaricious gurus. Some people felt that way. It was very hard for some people, to lose Srila Prabhupada. So those who took this to the furthest degree, then they became Ritviks, who they just didn't believe that anyone's qualified to be guru, and that Srila Prabhupada never intended for anybody to be guru, and that Srila Prabhupada should just remain the guru for everybody, and end of story. Sort of like the Jesus idea. And I get how it seemed easier. It might seem easier in the mind, but it's not our philosophy or what our acharyas have done or said through the ages. That's not parampara. However, they did have some genuine concerns, and those things were recognized over time. The complexities of succession, it's ongoing in every institution. To think that it would just, things just resolve, and it's not like that. To move, but to move through the stages that are required. We need to be patient and to be determined and to become more mature people. And unfortunately, we were rather short on those qualities, but one of the big issues which had been going on since Srila Prabhupada's departure and increasing over time was that many devotees were leaving to find shelter in the Gaudiya Math, and many devotees who felt unhappy or felt they'd been hurt or treated badly, and some really thought that ISKCON was just going off philosophically, or they didn't have faith in the current gurus. And I think maybe for many, just the experience of extreme grief of losing Srila Prabhupada, and just the more simple beginning days, that it's hard, change is hard, and many were disenchanted and looking for inspiration elsewhere. And of course, that is the individual right of all souls to do as they see fit. But as an institution, we have to have guidelines. So, all of this happening, just for the general devotees, it was quite shocking. Things had once been simple. We were one family. Not to say there's always been problems, But now things were branching off in ways that, well, I personally, I never expected. It was scary. And this fear, it seemed to produce an overabundance of defensiveness on all sides, both those who stayed and those who went somewhere else, or for whatever reason. There was just a lot of defending, wanting to be right. And I think probably the biggest issue at this time in these years was the rising popularity of Srila Narayan Maharaj. And the reason it seemed more problematic, or most problematic, was because it was a number of highly placed and respected ISKCON leaders who were visiting him regularly and taking guidance from him. And so this was a growing concern. I mentioned this previously. I started hearing talk about this some years prior. And it was eventually brought to the GBC as an issue, I think 92, 93, and then didn't seem to be getting resolved. And then finally in 95, 96, it really came to a head, and that the GBC had a number of very serious concerns, and they felt that they had to make a very strong stance on this issue. And you know, this is a huge topic, and there are many angles of vision on it, and I have no intention of, you know, trying to explain it all to everybody, but I think it is important, you know, to understand when things happened, why they happened, how they happened. History is important. But I think that in order to really understand what was going on here, why the GBC were concerned and what the feelings were, I think it's important for all devotees, ISKCON devotees, to know a bit about the history of our and Srila Prabhupada's relationship with the Gaudiya Math. So even though it seems like going off topic, but I just feel the necessity for people to have more of a just basic, simple understanding of this history. You know, so I want to just back up, go way back in time and explain a little bit of that history, because I just see in talking with, there's just so many just do not know much about, you know, how the relationship that Srila Prabhupada had with the Gaudiya Math and how that all unfolded, you know. So I think most everyone knows that during Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's time, the Gaudiya Math was united and strong and powerful, learned, dedicated preachers, and they did so much, actually very quickly, and were remarkably successful. But of course, after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left, troubles immediately arose, and the Gaudiya Math basically then disintegrated into smaller groups. If you study the history of a religious institution, you'll see this is something that happens a lot. Difficult times come after the departure of the Acharya, which we have certainly experienced in ISKCON. So there's no need for us to find fault or criticize, you know, what went on with the Gaudiya Math. We should remember that we're just like new kids on the block. You know, new kid converts, fresh from Malechadesh. And it's not our place to have a condescending attitude. It is our place to understand, to have a good understanding of what went on. Prabhupada, he did want us very much to understand the main reason why this breakup happened, and so as to avoid it ourselves. And he identified a specific cause of the disintegration was the attempt to establish a successor Acharya rather than form a collegiate body, which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had instructed them to do. Of course, there are many, likely many other factors, you know, in that breakup, but this was the main point that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to understand. And, Srila Prabhupada, as a householder, he was involved with the Gaudiya Math to some extent, but he wasn't one of the central movers and shakers of the Gaudiya Math. After sannyas, he was more involved, but he stayed clear of the politics, and instead he focused on trying to fulfill Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's dreams to preach internationally. Now, initially, when Srila Prabhupada came to the US, he was flying blind, and he was open to Krishna's direction. And at first, he wanted very much to make his movement part of the Gaudiya Math. And this is documented. He wrote many letters, and he told many that this is a great opportunity here. And at that time, it had been at least maybe 30 years since there were any attempts to reach an international audience, because mostly Gaudiya Math was caught up internally. There's no evidence that anyone was intending to do this, to go international. So when first in the United States, Srila Prabhupada asked, he requested support. Send some brahmacharis or some money for a temple. This is a great opportunity. And but he didn't receive, he did get a little help, but really not what he had hoped. He did not get the support he had hoped for. And again, there's no need for us to criticize about this. There's probably many reasons why they didn't favorably respond to Prabhupada. Maybe they remembered it had been not so successful in the past, and it had been very expensive. And also at that time, the Gaudiya Math was very divided. There was no, administrative connection between them. There was no central structure. And the model that existed for every Gaudiya Math, there was one acharya. And so Srila Prabhupada was asking them to do something for which they had no precedent. It just wasn't part of their world. And there was very little unity in the Gaudiya Math, and each temple was completely independent. The idea of two acharyas, that was just, couldn't wrap their head around it. So anyone who accepted that offer would have been entering into territory that was strange and new to them. How can there be two gurus in the same institution? And, also Srila Prabhupada, he was not in a senior position, and his position as a astounding acharya had not manifested yet. So as God brothers, they had their own vision of who Srila Prabhupada was. It's probably safe to say that they didn't think that he would have much success, and that it would be better for them to focus on their own mats. So ISKCON was plan B. And also, to Srila Prabhupada's surprise, he found it was all young people joining, which was plan B of plan B. It wasn't that he planned that. Initially, his strategy was to persuade important people, famous people, great charitable foundations. He wrote letters. You can see these letters are there in the archives, to Carnegie Foundation, to the Rockefeller, Ford, United Nations. Because Srila Prabhupada's concept was yad yad acharati shreshas. Whatever great man does, common man will follow. So, if you look at his letters, you'll see that he wrote to world leaders, to cultural leaders in India and the US, and his logic and argument was all based on this conception that the world follows great people. But again, he got practically no response. So sometimes, we think that great people, they just go right to the top. They're just great people. But actually, we find that successful people usually have many, many failed attempts until finally something works. It's that great people are the ones that didn't give up. And so Srila Prabhupada didn't give up despite many failures. He just kept trying. And then all these young people started coming. And Srila Prabhupada realized this is Krishna's plan. And so, Gaudiya Math didn't want to join in, so he formed ISKCON. So then those early devotees who joined, they knew very little about the Gaudiya Math. It just wasn't relevant to our program. But we heard from Srila Prabhupada that they broke up because of not following Bhaktisiddhanta's desire for a governing body. And for this reason, we saw that Srila Prabhupada created the GBC very early on, to make sure that that was clear to all of us. This is the way he wants it to go. He wants to follow what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted. And then we saw that in 1970 there was a conspiracy problem. And again, that is a complex and long story which you should know something about. But it was an important event in terms of understanding Srila Prabhupada's relationship with the Gaudiya Math. It would be good to read about it. And there's plenty of evidence to what happened there. But to make a long story short, the first disciple that went to India, he had nowhere to stay. There was no one else there. So Prabhupada sent him to stay with a very respected godbrother. And of course he met, many others in the Gaudiya Math, and he communicated some of his experiences to godbrothers in the United States. And then a number of things occurred which led Srila Prabhupada to understand and to say that his disciple had been contaminated by his godbrothers and that it had spread like a virus to the disciples in the USA. And he considered it a very serious matter. And that contamination, well, it's an idea that still exists, that Prabhupada took that name Prabhupada, and many thought that was very offensive. And, they said straight out, the real Acharya is not your Prabhupada, it's Bhaktisiddhanta, and he stole this title. And therefore, it's kind of understandable that they felt that way about the title Prabhupada, but the conclusion is, therefore, ISKCON, with all its growing assets and properties and devotees, it really belongs to the Gaudiya Math. And therefore, the right thing is to take ISKCON and give it back to the Gaudiya Math. Take it from Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada was very, very concerned, even concerned for his own personal safety. So we were so new and uneducated, and all of us, most of us, we didn't really understand this very well. But we saw that Srila Prabhupada was very disappointed, although he had planned to stay in Los Angeles as his headquarters, and he was just going to write and not travel. But instead he decided, because of this, what was going on, that he was going to go back to India. And so he said goodbye to Rukmini Dwarkadish in a very touching scene, which is described. I'm not sure if it was Prabhupada himself or another devotee there, but said that Srila Prabhupada he asked Rukmini Dwarkadish, why are you sending me back to India? And that he received a reply from them to just wait and see the plan. Something like that. Those are not necessarily the exact words, but something to that, that something was going to happen. And as it turned out, the return to India was extraordinary. Thousands of people came to see him. And that was not expected. Everything just exploded. Srila Prabhupada asked 200 devotees to come to India then. It was, and it's just interesting to note, because all of us, we have things that happen that you think are disappointing or unfavorable, in our lives. But if we're patient and determined, often those things maybe push us or propel things positively forward in unexpected ways, So up to this point, Gaudiya Math wasn't part of our world. Not many devotees were in India yet, and very few Indian devotees in ISKCON, and had even ever met anyone from the Gaudiya Math. So, I'm just saying these things because to reconstruct and understand this history, we have to be able to put yourself back in time and experience what it was like to be alive at that time. We were innocent, vulnerable. And when devotees first went to Vrindavan, we all stayed together in the same place in Fogal Ashram, all went out in the same buses and went to the same places all together. We didn't go anywhere by ourselves. The whole environment was highly protected and simple, and all we knew was Srila Prabhupada. However, when we started to manifest the India projects, numerous unpleasant events took place, which, I'm not going to describe those things, but that clearly indicated that there were some godbrothers, not all, of course, but there were those who wanted to block Srila Prabhupada's progress in Mayapur and Vrindavan, and some pretty nasty things happened. So despite this, Srila Prabhupada made many attempts to work with and to unite with his godbrothers. And Srila Prabhupada told them over and over, as you can see, Krishna is doing something amazing in ISKCON. And that even Srila Prabhupada himself didn't expect. He was just as surprised as anyone that it grew so quickly. This is Krishna spreading all over the world. Why not work together? And he did ask a number of godbrothers, why don't you come and work with me? Become part of the movement. And he would assure them that we'll provide you anything. We'll fly you around, you can preach, whatever you want, and we'll facilitate you, whatever you require. But they all refused. And the reason, Srila Prabhupada said, one honest godbrother said, that, well, we don't want to give up our own positions. In my own mat, I'm the Acharya, and I would rather be a big fish in a little pond than a small fish in a big pond. So that was, that was a feeling. And probably many other things. But, in, I think, 76, in Mayapur, Sridhar Maharaj invited the GBC to a program. Mostly it was in Bengali, but Tamal Krishna Maharaj recorded it. And when he brought it back to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada wanted to hear it. What were they saying? So he listened to the recording and he was disturbed. And he said, they are offending me and they are criticizing me. Not Sridhar Maharaj, but there were some. And Srila Prabhupada said, never go back again. So Srila Prabhupada told us very clearly, don't associate with my godbrothers. Now, why did he say this? Was it because he was sectarian or he didn't respect his god brothers? Absolutely not. He knew how immature and naive we were, like spiritual babies, new to India, completely green. He knew we could easily be diverted, distracted, or confused, or even cheated. And most of us hadn't even been in Krishna consciousness 5 or 6 years, 7 years. Naturally, he was very protective of his young disciples and his infant organization. And he knew there were some god brothers who didn't want ISKCON to succeed, or who were after assets, and that there was danger there. And even though there were many god brothers that Srila Prabhupada respected and loved, but he also knew that naturally, there were differences in mood and emphasis. And Srila Prabhupada warned us that if they say one thing different, you will be confused. And of course, that's exactly what happened. In other words, Srila Prabhupada just felt it was the best for all of us to simply avoid the association at that time, and that it would not be helpful for the growth of ISKCON. And after Srila Prabhupada left, we saw that his concerns were certainly warranted, as there were some who tried to attack, tried to steal properties and temples, especially in South America. And there were significant problems that arose. And so as young people, we did have somewhat of a negative impression about the Gaudiya Math, but it is not based on envy or sectarianism, or that we didn't want Vaishnavas to be unified, but it was just due to the warnings and the instructions of Srila Prabhupada. But however, there's a point that must be remembered, that although Srila Prabhupada clearly warned us about associating with his godbrothers, he also said, do not criticize my godbrothers. It is not Vaishnava etiquette. This should always be kept in mind. Sometimes we're just like young upstarts, We could sometimes have, inappropriate and condescending attitudes towards people who are senior. And, another point, which is also very important, is that if we're going to talk about the Gaudiya Math, we should not make sweeping statements and lump everyone together like a homogeneous mass. Gaudiya Math has different branches, different moods, same as any institution, including ISKCON. It's important to see, to see people as individuals, to judge people as individuals. Not everyone is the same. It's not like, oh, the Gaudiya Math this, oh, ISKCON that. I really don't like sweeping statements. It's so impersonal. No matter what, Vaishnava etiquette is always to be followed. There are varying views within the Gaudiya Math, just as in ISKCON there is also, or in any group. And so, best to follow Vaishnava etiquette and be patient. Time reveals many things, but we should never lose our Vaishnava behavior. And another point to know, that Srila Prabhupada was aware of the dangers, but that did not make him closed-minded or sectarian. Srila Prabhupada was very broad-minded and open. One time Jamuna and Gurudas were invited for prasadam at one of the main temples in Vrindavan, and while they were eating, one of the Goswamis in charge started criticizing many things that Srila Prabhupada did. Oh, why does he wear rings? And, it was very unpleasant. And afterwards they told Srila Prabhupada. And his response was that in Vrindavan, there's 5,000 Caste Goswamis. There's 5,000 shopkeepers. There's 5,000 widows. And we have to keep good relationships with all of them. Otherwise, we will end up in court, like the Gaudiya Math. And on another occasion, Srila Prabhupada sent Jamuna and Gurudas to his godbrother, Obiel Kapoor. And after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left, he had taken shelter of a Babaji as a Shiksha Guru, and one who Bhaktisiddhanta had vehemently criticized and was staunchly opposed to. So it was a peculiar situation. But Srila Prabhupada said, just very simply, he just said, oh, that is his weakness, and that's all. You know, he didn't consider that this disqualified Dr. Kapoor from helping the movement. He was very broad view of the Krishna consciousness movement and of engaging people in it, all kinds of people in it. So this is just some background history to give context to understanding these Gaudiya Math issues. Especially, I will speak more about specifically Narayan Maharaj issues that arose at that time. I mean, I will have to, because this is already a fairly long talk, so I will divide this into, there will be a part 2, and where I want to discuss more about what transpired with Narayan Maharaj and and how that affected us. And it's not that I am not qualified or capable or even have a desire to, you know, explain away things or take sides on anything, but I just feel like the general history should be understood and some lessons must be learned from them, many lessons for the future, for the problems that we will face in the future. You know, so this context, I went back over this history just to give the context for why, you know, when you know what transpired, well, then why did the GBC behave a certain way? Why did, you know, you need to have the context in order to, you know, understand it properly, you know, at least a little bit, you know. There's many ways of understanding every issue, you know, multiple views, and all of them can be right. So it's not my intention to, you know, take a stance on something. So I think that it's best to stop now because this has been a fairly long talk. But I think these were important times that, you know, people that are new to ISKCON or that are, you know, younger devotees should know about, should understand to some extent. You know, so I'll close now, and I will continue with the same topic and onwards to, you know, what was happening in Mayapur for us in those days. So I will end here. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for listening.